Chapter 1. The Quiet Ashes of Bracca. The galaxy, once illuminated by the gentle radiance of the Jedi Order, had grown dim. The Clone Wars had ended, yes, yet peace was a hollow illusion. An empty shell that rang when struck, a brittle promise carried on cold imperial winds. In the hush that followed the drums of war, the Empire spread like a tightening fist, closing sector after sector, squeezing until defiance could not breathe. For those who had once borne the braid and the blade, survival itself became a new meditation, not upon serenity, but upon concealment, not upon luminous beings, but upon the smallness of one's shadow. Cal Kestis was one such fugitive, a boy who had crossed the threshold into young manhood while hiding inside the carcasses of dead starships. Once a Padawan beneath the steady guidance of the Lasat Jedi, Jaro Tapal, he had watched the Great Jedi Purge unmake his world in a single shattering breath. The Purge did not only take his master, it took the cadence of temple halls, the bright laughter of initiates, the fragrance of waxed floors and training sabers, all reduced to memory and ash. What remained was a scar on the spirit, and a will that refused to break. He chose Bracca, a world of rust and rain, as a place to dissolve into the ordinary. Here the bones of the Republic's proud Venator-class star destroyers were lowered into yawning pits and cut apart with humming saws. Here, gantry cranes marched like steel arachnids across horizons of wreckage, and sparks fell like sterile stars into oceans of oil-slick water. The air tasted of iron and ozone. The sky, forever overcast, glowed a dull orange at the edges as the smelters burned through the night. It was a fitting refuge for a fallen Padawan. For Cal, too, was a ship being dismantled, deck by deck, beam by beam. The Jedi within him taken down to the bolts, boxed and hidden. By day, he wore the anonymity of a scrapper. Coarse linens, heavy gloves, a collar to keep the ash from his throat. He clipped lines and fused cables, unfastened armor plates, and guided chains that groaned beneath ancient weight. By night, he lay on a narrow bunk and listened to the song of industry. The grinding of teeth in the great metal maw of the yard. The rasp of wind over hulls that had once flown beneath the proud sigil of the Republic. In dreams, he plunged through smoke as escape pods tumbled like seeds on the storm. And Jaro Tapal's final command returned to him, deep and immovable as bedrock. Survive, Cal. Survive. The people of Bracca practiced a culture of forgetting. They did not ask where a man had come from, and they did not answer when a man asked where a ship had died. They measured their days by whistles and work rotations, by the color of the smelter's glow at dusk, by the rasping calls of carrion birds that nested in cracked durasteel ribs. Meals were simple. Bread damp with steam, fish pulled from poisoned shallows and soaked in vinegar to leach the taste. There were rituals, too, small protections against the indifference of machinery. 3 taps on the gantry rail before crossing, a ribbon tied at the wrist when climbing, a whispered phrase to the wind when the chains began to sway. Hold me steady. Hold me steady. Cal adopted these customs without question, letting them calcify around him like a second skin. Yet beneath that skin, the Force still breathed. He tried to dam it, to quiet it, to make it a still pool rather than a river. But rivers yearn to move. Sometimes, perched high upon the skeleton of a Venator's wing, he would feel a tug at the edge of knowing, a suggestion to shift his foot, to glance left, to wait one heartbeat longer before stepping. The Force does not shout, it murmurs. It does not demand, it invites. And Cal, battered by fear yet not unmade by it, found himself listening, not openly, never openly, but in the silent places of the mind, where only breath speaks. There were whispers, even here, of hunters who walked in crimson and black. The Inquisitorius, a word that passed from lip to lip like a coal, too hot to hold for long. They were said to be former Jedi, twisted into instruments of imperial will, or adepts raised in secret to wield a colder gospel. They hunted the scattered and the stubborn. They listened for ripples in the Force the way a navigator listens for the change in wind. In taverns near the floodlights, men spoke of a fortress upon a waterworld, the Fortress Inquisitorius, and of sisters and brothers numbered by rank rather than name. The second sister, the ninth, the fifth. Cruel titles spoken softly so as not to wake the dark. Whether these tales were true mattered little on Bracca. Their truth was in the fear they inspired, and fear makes its own reality. On a grey morning that smelled of rain, the yard crew rigged lines around a battered Venator prow and began the slow, delicate process of lowering it into a new cut trench. Cal moved with the practiced grace of repetition, hand over hand along a cable slick with oil. He kept his gaze lowered, his shoulders rounded, his presence small. A new foreman had come in on the last shuttle, and new eyes meant new questions. Cal answered those questions by being as uninteresting as rust. But fate has its own arithmetic. A coupling failed. It did not hiss or warn. It snapped like a bone, and the world lurched. The prow rolled, the gantry screamed, and a young scrapper named Prauf, cheerful, quick to laugh, with a missing tooth and a habit of humming, lost his footing. He fell, flailing, towards a chasm lined with knives of torn plating. There are moments when terror stretches time into silk, when a single breath contains 1,000 choices. Cal did not choose. He remembered only the weight of Jaro Tapal's hand on his shoulder, and the old, simple truth that compassion is swifter than caution. His palm lifted, the river in him surged, and Prauf hung in the air as lightly as a feather caught in an updraft. Chains swung, sparks leapt. Someone shouted. Cal exhaled and drew Prauf to the platform, setting him down as gently as a father sets down a sleeping child. In the span of a heartbeat, the deed was done. In the span of a second heartbeat, the cost revealed itself. Cal felt it, like a pebble dropped into deep water, ripples widening, moving, announcing. The veil had torn. Somewhere, someone listening for such disturbances had heard the whisper of his mercy. That night, the smelters burned with a dull, sullen glow, and the clouds pressed low as lids over tired eyes. Cal lay awake, the bunk frame creaking beneath him, and tried to breathe past the tightness in his chest. He had kept his saber hidden, wrapped in oilcloth, stored inside a tool case with a broken latch, and he had promised himself never to ignite it again. To ignite it would be to declare his existence, to carve his name in light upon the darkness, to draw the hunters like moths to an open flame. And yet, what is a promise made to fear when weighed against a life? He turned the question over and over like a stone in the palm until its corners were smooth. Outside, rain began to patter against the corrugated roofs, a soft percussion that steadied the pulse. He listened to it, and to the distant groan of cranes settling into night. Bracca smelled clean for a moment, as clean as a world of rust can be. And the scent called to mind other rains, temple gardens after the sprinklers, the hush of night classes when the lamps were dimmed, the way laughter carried along the colonnades. Memory is a gentle treachery. It comforts even as it opens the old wound. He rose and sat upon the edge of the bunk, fingers laced, elbows on knees, head bowed. "Trust in the Force," he murmured, and the words sounded different now. Not a lesson repeated to please a master, but an oath made in the quiet to steady a trembling soul. He let the phrase lengthen. Trust in the Force. And between the words, he let silence bloom, a dark flower with soft petals, breathing in and breathing out. He counted heartbeats like footfalls on a long road. The road did not promise safety. It promised only a direction. In the distance, thunder rolled across the flats. Not the storm, but the night trains that dragged scrap to the smelters. Their voices were deep and mournful, like whales traveling under black water. Cal imagined their carriages laden with the armor of fallen clones, with plastoid plates stained by 1,000 campaigns, with helmets whose visors no longer saw. Once, those helmets had turned upon their generals. Once, those soldiers had obeyed a hidden command and unmade the very guardians they had sworn to protect. In the soft dark, Cal pictured Jaro Tapal again, towering, fierce, yet patient. His purple saber cutting a line through chaos, while his great hand urged a frightened Padawan forward. Survive. The word has two edges. To live, and to live with what has been done. There were stories told in whispers of the Inquisitors' methods. They traveled with purge troopers in black, troopers trained to counter the ways of the Jedi. They questioned entire towns when a child lifted a cup without touching it. They silenced witnesses with a glance. They sat down in markets and schools and sanctuaries alike, giving sermons about order, while their red blades hummed like hornets. Their ships were said to be as dark as night birds, their presence a pressure in the air, like the feeling before lightning strikes. Cal did not know which of these tales were true, but truth was no shield. Even fables can hunt when fear gives them feet. He returned to the bunk and finally let himself recline, eyes half-lidded, hands folded upon his chest. He imagined the sky above the clouds, where stars still burned with indifferent grace. He imagined himself a mote adrift between them, small enough to pass unseen. Just another scrapper, he whispered to the dark. And the dark, being polite, did not answer. Sleep came, slow as dusk, heavy as a blanket. Before it closed upon him, he felt again the faintest stirring. Not warning, not yet. Only the awareness that the river within could not remain dammed forever. Mercy had moved through him today. Tomorrow, consequence would move toward him. And so the chain began to draw tight. The quiet exile upon Bracca had taken one step back into the current. However reluctant, however weary, Cal Kestis was returning to the path he had once walked with light in his hand. For survival alone is a pale companion. And the galaxy, though draped in troubled shadow, still waited, patient, listening, for the echo of a blade of blue fire returning to song. Rest now. Breathe with the rain. For in the hours to come, hunters will cross the stars with silent purpose, and boots will touch rusted decks, and questions will be asked in smooth, cold voices. But not yet, not yet. Tonight, there is only the hush of falling water, the warmth of a narrow bunk, and the mantra that steadies the wandering heart. Trust in the Force. Trust in the Force. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Smog. Morning arrived on Bracca, not with the kindness of sunlight, but with the groan of silence and the hiss of steam vents. A pale glow crept through the smog, casting the skeletal frames of dismantled ships into long, crooked shadows. Cal stirred from his bunk, his limbs heavy from the uneasy sleep that had come at last. He dressed without words, pulling gloves over scarred hands, fastening boots that were still damp from the night's rain. The Force murmured faintly beneath the surface of his mind, restless as a caged animal. The scrapper's yard was alive already. Men and women filed toward the gantries in weary silence, lunch tins clinking, voices hushed. The rhythm of Bracca was mechanical. Whistles signaled shifts, chains rattled, sparks flared, and the air forever tasted of iron dust. Yet beneath the daily pattern there was something new. A tension, thin but sharp, stretched across the workers like a taut wire. Cal noticed it in their eyes, glances darting toward the sky, shoulders pulled tight, words left unspoken. Prauf, his companion in labor and in silence, fell into step beside him. The man's grin was unchanged, but his eyes betrayed unease. Big ships came in last night, he muttered under his breath, too soft for the foreman's ears. Not Republic, not freighters either. Black hulls, mean-looking. He spat to the side as though to cleanse his mouth of the taste. Don't like it, Cal. Not one bit. Cal said nothing, but his stomach tightened. Black ships. The description was enough to set his thoughts into motion, enough to quicken his heartbeat. He recalled the whispers, the Inquisitorius arriving like carrion birds wherever the faintest ripple of the Force had been felt. He remembered the feeling of the previous day, the pebble dropped in water, the ripple spreading. His rescue of Prauf had not gone unanswered. The day stretched long, each clang of hammer and whine of saw blade ringing in Cal's ears louder than the last. He worked with careful precision, yet every motion felt exaggerated, exposed. He climbed across beams slick with condensation, cut through plating blackened by fire. and all the while he felt eyes upon him, though no one looked his way. Once he paused to steady a cable, and his gaze lifted toward the horizon. There, half hidden by the haze, he saw them. Angular silhouettes of craft unfamiliar to Bracca's usual sky. They lingered like predators above the yard, waiting. At midday, when the whistles blew and the men gathered for their meager rations, Cal sat apart. He chewed without hunger, his thoughts tangled. The workers' chatter was restless, punctuated by nervous laughter. Someone swore they had seen armored soldiers disembark from the new arrivals. Another whispered that interrogations had begun at the far end of the yard, near the shuttles. The words passed like sparks through dry tinder, igniting unease in every heart. Prauf leaned closer, his voice a rasp. "They're not here for us scrappers, Cal. We're not important enough. Just keep your head down and it'll pass." But even as he spoke, doubt lingered in his tone. The Empire did not come to Bracca for nothing. The afternoon wore on. Shadows lengthened across the broken hulls. The smelters glowed like watchful eyes, casting their sullen light upon the yard. And then, as the shift drew to its weary end, a sound split the air. It was no whistle, no groan of machinery. It was the deep, resonant hum of repulsor lift engines, ships descending where none had landed before. The workers froze. Tools were set down, cables swayed untended. Heads turned as one toward the open landing yard beyond the gates. Through the smoke, black shapes descended like carrion birds coming to roost. Their wings folded with mechanical precision, their hulls etched with crimson insignia. When the landing struts touched the ground, the sound echoed like a heartbeat across the yard. The ramp lowered with the slow grace of inevitability. From within the dark craft, figures emerged. Purge troopers in black plastoid armor, their visors blank and pitiless, fanned out in disciplined formation. And at their center walked a figure taller than the rest, cloaked, helmeted, with the unmistakable weight of presence that pressed upon the very air. The second sister. Her voice carried without effort, cold and clear, cutting through the smog like a blade. Citizens of Bracca, by the order of the Emperor, you will submit to questioning. A Jedi traitor has been detected in this sector. She paused, letting the words settle like ash upon the listeners. Those who cooperate will be spared. Those who resist will not. Fear rippled through the workers, silent yet visible. A shudder in shoulders, a catch of breath, the sudden stillness of 100 souls. Cal lowered his head, fighting to quiet his pulse, to make himself smaller than the smallest shadow. But the force within him stirred, restless, aware of the predator that now stood among them. Prauf shifted beside him, eyes darting, mouth trembling on words unspoken. Cal placed a hand on his arm, a warning, a plea for silence. Yet already the troopers moved among the workers, their heavy boots striking in unison, their rifles ready. One by one, men and women were questioned, their names demanded, their origins probed. Each denial was met with suspicion, each hesitation with a sharper tone. The noose was tightening, slow and deliberate. The second sister stepped forward, her crimson-lined cloak trailing across the metal deck. She moved with the calm assurance of a predator certain of its kill. Her helmet tilted slightly as she surveyed the crowd, as though she could see more than eyes revealed, as though she could feel. "The Jedi cannot hide," she declared softly, yet her voice carried to every ear. "The Force leaves its mark. The guilty cannot help but betray themselves." Cal's breath caught. The memory of Prauf's fall, the reach of his hand, the surge of power. It was all here, written in the air around him. He clenched his fists, lowering his gaze, willing the current of the Force to still. Yet the river does not forget its course. Already he felt her attention drifting closer. Prauf's courage faltered. He stepped forward, voice shaking yet loud enough to carry. "We're loyal workers. There are no Jedi here." The words were defiance, yet also defense, a shield cast over his friend. Cal's heart tightened. The second sister turned, her helmet fixed upon Prauf. Slowly, she descended the ramp, each step measured, deliberate. She stood before him now, a figure of armored shadow, her saber hanging at her side like a threat unspoken. "Loyalty," she repeated, the word a mockery. "You presume to speak for them all." Her voice dripped with cruel amusement. Prauf's jaw set. "We've given everything to the Empire. Our sweat, our blood. We're nothing but scrappers. Leave us be." Silence followed, heavy and unbearable. Then came the hiss. A crimson blade sprang to life, casting its scarlet glow across the smog. Gasps echoed through the crowd. The second sister raised the weapon slowly, savoring the fear it birthed. Cal's breath faltered. The river within him surged, no longer a whisper but a roar. His hand twitched toward the hidden saber beneath his tunic. He had sworn never to ignite it. He had sworn to remain unseen. But Prauf stood in the path of death, and the Force cried out for action. The moments stretched, balanced upon the edge of decision, and the quiet exile of Bracca teetered on the brink of becoming something far greater. Chapter 3. The Blade Remembered. There are instants in a life when the river can no longer be dammed, when the water overtops the banks and seeks its ancient course. Cal felt that instant arrive with the hiss of the second sister's saber, with the scarlet light reflected in Prauf's frightened eyes, with the hush that fell across the scrapper's yard like a shroud. Time thinned, stretched, and then it broke. The crimson blade began to rise. The Force reached for Cal, and Cal reached back. His hand found the wrapped hilt beneath his tunic. The cloth rasped away. A cylinder of memory lay in his palm, metal worn smooth by training halls and trials long past. He drew breath, steady and slow, the way Jaro Tapal had taught him, and the blue fire of his saber sprang to life. Light met light, blue against red, a dawn against a wound. Gasps tangled into shouts as workers stumbled back from the sudden radiance. Purge troopers lifted their rifles, movements sharp and practiced, while the second sister stilled, her helmet angling with a predator's interest. "Ah, there you are," she murmured, savoring the discovery. Cal stepped forward, inserting himself between Prauf and the blade. His stance found itself, feet aligned, weight centered, saber held at a guard he had not practiced in years, yet which returned as naturally as breath. The first bolt came, harsh and bright. His blade rose and turned it aside with a ringing tone. Another followed, then another, and the old dance awakened in his muscles. He pivoted, deflected, advanced one step, then another, keeping Prauf behind him, herding him back toward the cover of a rusted fin. The second sister held her crimson saber angled low, the hum of its rage a steady undertone to her voice. "A relic, hidden among refuse," she said, drifting closer as a hawk might drift on a thermal. "You wear your fear like a cloak, boy. Yet the Force answers you still. How quaint." "Run!" Cal whispered to Prauf without looking back. "Now!" Prauf hesitated only a breath, then fled into the maze of hulls, calling to the others to scatter. Troopers moved to pursue, but the second sister lifted a gloved hand and they froze mid-step. "The Jedi first," she said, as if discussing a minor point of order. "The rest will follow." She came at him without haste, a single testing cut, smooth and unhurried. Cal met it, parried, and felt at once the depth of the current he opposed. Her strength was not merely in muscle, it was in certainty, in a terrible composure. She pressed, he yielded. Sparks fell like fireflies. He disengaged with a twist, stepped back, angled his blade to form a luminous barrier between them. Around them, the yard erupted into motion, workers fleeing, troopers shouting, floodlights pivoting to bring the duel into cruel relief. "Name yourself," she said, circling. "Jedi whelp. Stray. Survivor. Which title will you wear as you kneel?" "Cal," he said, because truth felt steadier than silence. "Cal Kestis." "Ah." A soft laugh in her helmet. "One of the lost. How comforting for you that you can be found." She struck in earnest now, and the conversation of blades began. Her form was economical, lovely in its cruelty. Every motion measured for effect, every angle designed to corner and cut. Cal gave ground, letting the rhythm guide his feet along familiar lines, redirect, deflect, yield. Then, when the moment offered itself, riposte. His saber kissed her pauldron and skittered away in a shower of blue sparks. The touch changed nothing, but it reminded him he was not only prey. Blaster fire stitched the air. Cal spun, catching a volley on the flat of his blade, sending it arcing into the shoulder of a trooper who collapsed with a hiss. Another bolt flew wild and shattered a beacon above, raining glass that winked in the red and blue light like falling stars. Sirens began to bleat. The smog churned, torn by downdrafts as more black craft swept low, disgorging squads to close the ring. He could not hold here, not against such numbers, not under the gaze of that patient predator. Escape was the only path that did not end in ruin. The Force whispered of lines and ladders, of a service gantry leading toward the maglev yards. He feinted high, spun low, and cut a cable that released a swinging hook. The hook scythed through the air, forcing the second sister to shift her footing. In the slender opening, Cal ran. He ran across a catwalk slick with rain, leaping a gap where plating had torn away, boots clanging in a panicked rhythm. Troopers poured after him. A bolt scorched his sleeve. The smell of burned fabric followed him like a warning. He ducked through a hatchway into the ribcage of a derelict Venator, its corridors angled and broken, lights long dead. Here, in the maze of the ship's skeleton, his breath sounded too loud, and the beat of his heart became a drum that tried to summon courage. Little Jedi, The second sister's voice flowed through the corridors on the audio poles, intimate and unhurried. You cannot run from what you are. I will teach you that. I will teach you many things. Cal vaulted a fallen bulkhead, slid down a slanted deck, and burst out onto a maintenance platform that overhung the maglev line. Beyond, through curtains of rain, trains drifted like steel snakes between the yards and the smelters, their windows fogged, their roofs slick with oil. A horn moaned, low and mournful. If he could reach a car, if he could ride it out of the ring of troopers, he might find a shadow deep enough to think. He sprinted for the edge, saber in his right hand, free palm outstretched. A passing car slid beneath him. Too far. He exhaled, trusted, and leapt. The force lifted him the span of a breath, no more, and he came down hard on the car's roof, rolling to bleed the landing. Behind him, troopers spilled onto the platform. Red bolts carved lines through rain as the train carried him away. For a moment, wind and speed were his allies. He crawled to a ladder well, dropped through to the coupling space between cars, and sealed the hatch behind him. The walls rattled, the floor thrummed. He dimmed his saber and let darkness hide him. His shoulders shook. Whether from cold or nearness to despair, he could not say. He had revealed himself utterly. Bracca was no longer a refuge. It was a snare filled with teeth. The respite lasted only to the next bend. A winged shadow fell across the windows, a black craft pacing the train with predatory ease. Its floodlights bloomed white and pitiless, and two purge troopers rappelled onto the roof with dull thuds. Cal's jaw tightened. He ignited his saber and climbed. Rain stung his face as he emerged. The troopers advanced in a crouch, magnetized boots clamping to the slick surface. The first lunged. Cal turned his saber in a tight circle, meeting the shock baton's crackling arc and rolling it away. A kick, a sweep, a shove with the force. The trooper slid, clawed for purchase, and vanished into the blur of night. The second fired a burst. Cal's blade caught the bolts and sent them ricocheting into the belly of the pursuing ship, where they sparked harmlessly. He closed, pivoted, and struck the trooper's rifle in half. A backhand with the hilt ended the contest. He had a breath, one, before the ship's underside opened and another figure descended, slower, heavier. Not the second sister, another of the Inquisitors, the ninth, his armor broad and brutal, his stance a fortress. The ninth brother's red blade unfolded with a grinding snarl. You tire already, the ninth brother rumbled, more amused than angry. Rain beaded on his gauntlets and hissed against his saber's heat. Little ember, I will snuff you gently. They came together in a crash of light. The ninth brother fought like a storm anchor. Every blow a hammer meant to drive Cal into the metal beneath his feet. Cal yielded and flowed, taking the edges off the force of those strikes, letting angles and timing do the lifting that his arms could not. He slid under a cleaving cut, rose with a flick to nip the Inquisitor's vambrace, then bent backward as a horizontal sweep hissed an inch from his throat. The train curved, wind howled. Their blades drew arcs of red and blue fire across the rain. Your master cannot help you. the ninth brother said, pressing forward. He is dust. You are a lesson unfinished. Then I will finish it myself, Cal replied, though his breath came ragged, though his calves burned. The Inquisitor stepped, overcommitted for the breadth of the roof. Cal felt the imbalance. A single grain shifted on the scale and touched the force like a swimmer touches the surface for air. A small pull, a nudge at the ninth brother's ankle. Enough. The Inquisitor's boot slid. Cal struck, not at the man, but at the coupling control beside them. The lever snapped, the automatic emergency locks triggered, and the rear cars began to decelerate with a shudder that ran like a shiver through steel. The ninth brother staggered, arms pinwheeling for a heartbeat of indignity that felt like a year. Cal shoved, pouring the last of his breath into the push. The Inquisitor toppled backward, caught the lip of the roof and held by one gauntleted hand. Cal stepped in, blade raised, then paused. Mercy is a habit difficult to break. In that pause, the black ship's tractor beam seized its master and lifted him away, blade scraping sparks as it withdrew. The ninth brother's laughter, thick and disdainful, trailed behind him. Run, Ember. Burn yourself out. The train screamed into a tunnel. Cal dropped through the hatch just as a row of pylons whipped over the roof where he had stood. Darkness swallowed him, broken by the flash of emergency strobes. He moved forward, car to car, past stacked crates and empty benches, past posters peeling from walls that advertised safety protocols no one observed. At the front, the conductor's cabin lay open, its systems dead. The train was being guided remotely now, not to the smelters, but toward a siding where a cordon awaited. He needed a different way off this iron serpent. The Force offered a picture. A service hatch exterior to the nose, a maintenance walkway that paralleled the track for a stretch before vanishing into scaffolds. He breathed, centered, and went. When he emerged, the storm had softened to a fine mist. The world felt hushed, as if holding breath to see what shape fate would take. Floodlights drew cones through the damp air. Ahead, a landing pad glowed with the promise of inevitability. Figures waited, troopers in rank, and at their heart, the still point of a turning world. The second sister. She raised a hand. The train's brakes bit. Metal screamed. Cal's knees buckled as momentum did its quiet arithmetic. The cars shuddered to a stop, doors opening in unison like mouths ready to pronounce a sentence. He stood upon the nose, blue saber low at his side, rain silvering his hair, breath steadying for what must come. The second sister stepped forward, her voice soft as velvet and sharp as the edge beneath. There now, she said. The running is finished. For a moment. Kneel, Cal Kestis. Do not make this more painful than it need be. Cal lifted his blade to guard and felt the world contract until it included only the rhythm of his heart, the weight of the hilt, the sound of rain upon metal. He remembered temple corridors and the echo of young feet racing toward lessons. He remembered laughter that had not known it would end. He remembered Jaro Tapal's hand, immense and warm. Survive. Yes. But survival without purpose is only a long surrender. He would not surrender. Not yet. Then come take me, he said, and the blue light deepened as if it had heard. The troopers advanced. The second sister began to walk, and in the narrow space between fear and resolve, Cal Kestis chose the path that leads through danger toward destiny. He chose to be what the galaxy had tried to unmake. He chose, once more, to be Jedi. Chapter 4. The Stranger's Hand. Impact and silence, and then the sound returned to the world in layers, as if Bracca were reassembling itself from fragments. First the rain tinging on cooling plates, then the hiss of brakes releasing their final breath, then the shuffle of boots forming a perimeter around a single figure standing at the nose of a halted train. Cal Kestis held his saber low, a ribbon of dusky blue cutting a quiet seam through the smog. The second sister waited not 10 paces away, her crimson blade a patient wound in the air. Between them, the thin exchange of breath, the measure of a duel that had not yet begun. "Such spirit," she said, voice smooth as lacquer. "The Emperor believes the garden must be pruned. I prefer to savor the scent before the cut." Her helmet tilted. "Kneel, and I will make your end swift." Cal's fingers tightened on the hilt. The memory of Jaro Tapal's training flowed through tendon and bone. The quiet stance, the precise economy of movement, the invitation to let fear pass through without anchoring in the heart. He breathed once, deep, and almost smiled. No, the world contracted to blade and rain. She moved first, not a rush but a measured advance, and the red arc came like a question. Cal answered with blue, letting the force of her cut roll down his elbows into his hips, grounding it, returning it as a shallow parry that opened space for a sidestep. They circled, boots whispering on wet steel. Troopers fanned wider, rifles raised, but none dared fire through their mistress's dance. The yard's floodlights tracked them like watchful eyes. A flicker, a feint, her saber curled toward his knee. He lifted, redirected, felt the strength in her arms and the greater strength in her certainty. Where he was breath, she was iron. He sought the water's path, the line of least resistance. She sought the blade's inevitability. Their wills met, rubbed like whetstone and steel, and the sound of it rang over the rain. "Your master dies in you, little ember," she said, pressing him back along the train's spine. "Each step you take is a goodbye you still refuse to say." "And yet, I step," he answered, and found an angle that let him slide inside her guard for a heartbeat. His blade grazed the rim of her vambrace. Sparks hopped and died in the wet air. She laughed softly, uninjured, entertained. Then the battlefield changed. Wind parted the smog as a new engine note cut through the rain. Higher, keening, almost playful. A sleek, light freighter burst from the clouds at a wicked angle, its hull painted in bands of cool teal and cream that seemed to glow even in Bracca's gloom. The ship banked, flared repulsors, and swooped low enough that troopers ducked and swore. A voice crackled through an exterior speaker with sardonic cheer. "You two look busy. Mind if I steal the boy?" The second sister did not so much as glance up. Shoot them down. But the freighter, the Stinger Mantis, was quicker than orders. Its belly turret spat a chain of warning shots that stitched the deck between Cal and the troopers, driving the cordon backward. A boarding ramp began to fold open like a beckoning tongue. At its lip stood a compact figure in an orange jacket. 4 arms working half a dozen controls even while he shouted with theatrical exasperation. "If you're a Jedi, kid, now would be an excellent time to be impressive." "Grease," a second voice said, quiet but commanding, closer than the ship. Cal's gaze flicked left. A woman strode out from the shadow of a toppled girder, as if she had been walking toward this moment from the far side of her life. She wore a long coat that shed water in sheets, a belt that carried no saber, and a face lined not by age, but by decision. Her eyes found Cal's with startling steadiness. "Come with me, if you want to live." The second sister's helmet turned fractionally, curiosity briefly pricking her composure. Then she moved, red carving the space where Cal had stood a breath before. He vaulted the nose, landed in a 3-point crouch, and ran with the woman into the cluttered maze of scaffolds that ringed the siding. Blaster bolts sewed glowing threads through the rain behind them. "Left," she said without looking. He obeyed. Up. There was a ladder. His hands found rungs slick as eel skin. "Hold!" Her palm lifted. A trooper rounded the corner below, rifle leading. The woman stepped off the ladder, pivoted, and drove her elbow into the trooper's throat with crisp finality. Cal had the disorienting thought that she moved like a Jedi who had misplaced her blade. "Go," she breathed, and they climbed again. They emerged onto a catwalk that shook with the percussion of the mantis hovering nearby. Floodlights painted the air in harsh cones. Shadows leapt like skittish animals. The freighter slipped sideways with impossible grace, aligning its ramp to the catwalk's end. The compact pilot, Grease Dritus, leaned far enough out that safety seemed a matter of opinion. "Introduce yourselves later. Run now." Cal and the woman sprinted. A squad of purge troopers burst from a stairwell to bar the way. The woman did not hesitate. She thumbed a device, a shock emitter, and flung it underhand. It detonated with a blossom of white arcs, bodies seizing and collapsing in a tangle of smoking armor. "Bridget!" she shouted. Cal extended his free hand and reached into the river that had been waiting all this time for the banks to fail. A fallen girder rose with reluctant grace, turned, and settled across a gap like a drawbridge answering a king's return. They dashed over. The ramp yawned wider, bright and safe and far. The mantis dipped to meet them. The second sister arrived on the catwalk below as they ran, her cape a dark flame in the rotor wash. She lifted her blade and pointed, a judge pronouncing sentence. "You cannot run forever, Cal Kestis." Her voice leapt the distance without strain. "We will take your truth from your tongue or your bones." "Try me," Grease muttered from the ramp, then flinched as she looked his way. Right, not helping. Cal reached the ramp at a sprint. The woman followed, pivoting to cover their retreat with a compact blaster she fired with cold precision. Grease slapped a control and the ramp began to fold. A blaster bolt shaved the edge of Cal's boot as metal lifted away from the catwalk. The drop yawned under him. He rolled inward, came up on a knee, and found himself face to face with his rescuer. "I'm Seer Junda," she said, breath steady despite the run. Rain stippled her eyelashes like dew on wire. "Former Jedi. Emphasis on former. The word carried an old wound. This is Grease. I'll explain everything once we're clear. She lifted her chin. Pilot! I am piloting, Grease protested, 4 hands a blur over toggles and throttles. I am exclusively piloting. Also, we have approximately too many bogies. The Mantis vaulted into the sky. Troopers fired vainly from the catwalks. TIE patrol craft clawed up through the smog in angry pairs. The ship rolled hard, skimmed a crane so closely its hook spun like a toy, then punched into open cloud. Cal felt the sudden lightness of altitude, the way sound thins when the ground's hold loosens. The deck tilted. He grabbed a rail and killed his saber. Seer braced beside him, eyes unfocused for a moment, as if listening to weather in the soul. You're strong, she said, almost to herself. Raw but steady. You saved someone yesterday. That's why they came. She blinked, focusing again. I know what hunts you. I used to stand where they stand. Cal searched her face. You were an Inquisitor. No, she said, with a flinch that looked like lightning felt, brief, bright, painful. But I trained someone who became one. I know their scent on the air. She glanced to the canopy, where the pilot's compartment revealed Grease wrestling the ship through a gauntlet of green lances. Grease, darling, if you could avoid letting us die, that would be appreciated. Only because you asked nicely. Grease hauled the yoke. The Mantis snapped into a dive that pressed Cal's stomach toward his spine. A TIE screamed past, overshooting. Another clung to their tail. Grease flipped a toggle. Panels along the dorsal spine slid aside like gills opening. Hold your breath. The Mantis shed a cloud of glittering chaff that shone like an artificial constellation in the floodlights. Sensors hiccuped. The pursuing craft wobbled as its targeting solution went dream-soft. Grease knifed through a support arch, skimmed a smelter mouth that pulsed orange like an opening eye, then punched the throttle. The sky blurred from grease-dark to iron-gray to the pallid amber that sat above Bracca like an old bruise. Ladies and Jedi, we are outbound. Seer exhaled a breath that had been waiting a long time to leave. She turned back to Cal, and in the steadiness of her gaze he felt an invitation that was not forceful, yet not optional. The gravity of a choice. We can take you somewhere the Empire isn't looking. Yet. But I didn't come to rescue a scrap worker. I came for a Jedi. A beat. Will you be one? Cal looked past her shoulder to the falling world. The rust valleys and smoking stacks. The trains like bright worms in the dusk. And felt a sadness as quiet as good rain. Bracca had been a bandage. Bandages are not homes. He swallowed, and with the swallow an old vow remembered the shape of its own words. If I go with you, what then? We find what the Empire fears you'll find, Seer said. A place, a legacy, a way to light candles in this wind. Her mouth thinned, and we face the ones who will come to stop us. The Inquisitors, Cal murmured, tasting the iron of the name. An image leapt unbidden, the ninth brother's laughter disappearing into tractor light, the second sister's blade like a red horizon. They won't stop. Neither will we, Seer said simply. Then, softer, as if remembering the etiquette of grief. "I am sorry about your master." The words landed without tearing. He nodded. To name a loss is to place it somewhere it can be carried. "I survived," he said, and heard Jaro Tapal say it with him from a distance that was also inside his lungs. Grease whooped as the cloud deck thinned and the first clean stars showed through. Not bright, not many, but unafraid. "We have clear sky and one moderately offended Star Destroyer vectoring the other way. Plotting jump. Try not to touch anything that glows or hums or looks expensive." He twisted to grin at Cal, teeth small and sharp. "Welcome aboard the Stinger Mantis, kid. Mind the upholstery. It's vintage." Seer laid a hand on Cal's forearm. Light, careful, as one touches a skittish animal that has decided not to bite. "When we jump, rest. After, we talk. There is a droid waiting for you at our next stop, and a world that remembers the old paths." "A droid?" Cal asked, caught by the sudden warmth in her tone. "You'll like him," she said, a hint of a smile ghosting the edge of her mouth. "He's braver than most people I've known." The cockpit lights dimmed to the cool of pre-jump. The stars stretched, thin threads pulled from needles, and then gathered themselves into the deep, velvety dark of hyperspace. The mantis hummed with the contented pulse of a creature running in its favorite element. Cal felt the pressure in his chest ease, not because they were safe, but because they were moving with purpose. He clipped his saber to his belt and closed his eyes. "Rest," Seer said, as if reading the thought. "We have far to go, and when you wake, we begin again." Cal let the darkness behind his lids become a kind night. He pictured Bracca's reign as a curtain falling on a first act. The hiss, soft as breath. He pictured the second sister's stillness not as an end, but as a promise that their paths would cross once more, when his hands were steadier and his heart more certain. He pictured a small droid, perched on a cliff rail, chirping at the wind. And somewhere beyond that, a temple door, waiting to be opened by a name he had not yet spoken aloud. "Trust in the Force," he murmured. Not to remember the past, but to greet the road. The ship held him like a cradle as hyperspace unfurled. And in the long corridor of that blue tunnel, a survivor drifted toward purpose. Slowly, steadily, with strangers who might yet become something more than that. The kind of allies whose footfalls keep time with a tired heart until it remembers how to walk without counting. The Great Purge lay behind him like a night that had lasted years. Ahead, the first reluctant gray of morning. Chapter 5. The Druid and the Ruins. Hyperspace flowed outside the canopy like a river of stars stretched thin into silk. Its endless shimmer lulled the mantis into a steady hum. And within its hold, Cal felt the strange comfort of motion. The kind that pulls one further from danger, yet deeper into mystery. He sat, strapped at the edge of a passenger couch, boots planted wide, fingers laced together over his saber. He had not slept as Seer advised, though he had closed his eyes. Rest did not come. Only the echo of crimson blades and the rasp of Prouf's frightened breath. Across the cabin, Care observed him in silence. She had the bearing of a teacher who knew when words would clutter more than clarify. At last she spoke, softly. "You will meet him soon." Cal blinked. "Meet who?" "Our companion." The hint of warmth in her tone was new, uncharacteristic. "He's waiting for us on Bogano." Grease grunted from the cockpit without turning. "More like sulking on Bogano. Lonely little scrap walker refused to leave when we set down last time. Kept pacing cliffs like he was waiting for somebody. He jabbed a control with unnecessary force. Turns out maybe he was." "Bogano." Cal repeated the name like a pebble turned over in hand. "I've never heard of it." "Few have," Sayre said. "It is obscure, shrouded, forgotten. The kind of place the Empire has not yet thought to search. That is why I left BD there. That is why I bring you." The mantis rattled as if in agreement. Cal leaned back, closing his eyes. And in the darkness behind them he saw a small silhouette waiting against a horizon, head cocked, lens eyes glowing. The vision came unbidden, but gentle. Unlike the visions of fire and blaster bolts that haunted him, this one felt like invitation. When the ship tore free of hyperspace, the view was startlingly quiet. Bogano spread beneath them as a patchwork of grassy plateaus rising from misted chasms. The world glowed with the green of springtime, untouched by cities. Flocks of winged creatures scattered before the mantis's shadow, their cries thin and plaintive. Waterfalls veiled cliffs with silver lace. The planet seemed a place exhaled from the galaxy's forgotten memory. An island of peace, adrift in a stormy age. Grease muttered into the controls. "Place gives me vertigo. All those cracks and holes waiting to swallow us. Can't imagine living here. Probably mold in the soup." Yet even his grumbling had a softness, as though the quiet world had already gentled him. They set down upon a landing pad half overgrown with moss. The ramp lowered into sunlight warmer than Bracca's grey light by 100 lifetimes. Cal stepped down and inhaled, the air damp and clean, tinged with flowers he could not name. His boots pressed into living grass rather than rusted steel. He had not realized how long it had been since he had felt a world breathe beneath him. Then came the sound. A chirp, high and bright, like laughter translated into metal. From the ridge above, a small figure bounded forward, white and red, spindly yet graceful, with lens eyes that gleamed with mirth. BD-1 skittered down the slope, whistling an eager greeting, and stopped at Cal's boots as though he had always belonged there. His head tilted, his body bobbed. Another chirp, inquisitive, affectionate. Cal crouched, extended a hand. The droid nuzzled his fingers like a creature greeting its companion after a long absence. "Hey, little guy," Cal murmured, surprise softening into wonder. "Were you waiting for me?" BD-1 trilled, then scrambled up his arm with a dancer's balance perching upon his shoulder. The small frame vibrated with excitement, lens eyes widening and narrowing in a pattern Cal somehow understood as joy. A warmth spread through Cal's chest. This was not chance. The Force had woven the meeting like two threads crossing in a loom. Sayre stood at the ramp's edge, watching. "He chooses whom he travels with. He has chosen you." Her voice carried no doubt, only recognition. Follow him. He knows the way. BD-1 chirped, leapt down and bounded toward the cliff path. Cal followed, boots whispering over grass, saber heavy at his belt, but heart strangely lighter. The path wound along chasms that plunged into mist. Wind tugged his tunic. The cries of unseen animals echoed from below. And all the while, BD-1 scampered ahead, pausing to whistle encouragement, then darting on. They came at last to a domed structure half buried in earth and vine. Its stonework was ancient, its surface scarred by rain and root. A faint hum emanated from within, subtle yet persistent, as though the walls themselves remembered. Cal touched the stone and felt the ripple of centuries pass into his palm. This was no mere ruin. This was a place where the Force had settled like dew. Inside, the air was cool, laced with the scent of moss and stone. Murals lined the walls, faded but legible. Figures with lightsabers, stars arrayed in patterns, creatures long forgotten. BD-1 projected a beam from his holocam, illuminating the path deeper into shadow. Cal walked softly, each step stirring dust that had lain undisturbed for lifetimes. At the chamber's heart lay a device, a holocron vault carved with sigils that glowed faintly when he approached. As his hand neared, light blossomed across its surface, responding to his presence. The vault whispered, not in words but in impressions. Children's laughter, the hum of training sabers, the warmth of shared meditation. Cal's throat tightened. This was memory preserved, a seed of the Jedi's future hidden in stone. The air shimmered. A figure appeared, translucent, serene. The image of Jedi Master Eno Cordova, long departed yet preserved in message. His voice, gentle as the rustle of robes, filled the chamber. If you are hearing this, the Order has fallen. The Jedi are scattered. But hope need not fade. Within this vault lies a list of young ones strong in the Force, hidden from the Empire's eyes. Protect them, train them. From them, the light may rise anew. Cal's heart pounded. A list of children, survivors yet unborn to despair. He felt the weight of their lives settle upon him like a mantle too large. He was no master. He was barely a knight. And yet, as the hologram faded, BD-1 chirped at him with unshakable trust, as though saying, "Yes, you." Seer's voice came from behind, hushed with reverence. She had followed him into the chamber. "Cordova was my master," she said. "He foresaw the darkness that was coming. He built this place as a refuge, a seed for renewal, and he left BD-1 as its guardian, to guide the one who would find it." Cal turned, searching her eyes. "You think that's me?" "I don't think," she said. "I know. The Force has led you here. It will not abandon you now." The vault's light dimmed, leaving them in solemn shadow. Outside, the wind keened through the cliffs like a chorus, mourning, yet also blessing. Cal placed a hand over his saber, feeling its familiar weight. He was still only one survivor, still hunted, still uncertain, But now, there was a thread stretched forward into the dark, a purpose, a path. BD-1 clambered back onto his shoulder, whistling with contentment. Cal exhaled, letting the sound steady him. Then we protect it, he whispered. We protect them all. And in the stillness of the ruin, a new vow was made. Not spoken by council decree or temple ritual, but written quietly in the marrow of a survivor who at last remembered what it meant, not only to live, but to continue. Chapter 6. Zeffo, Wind-Etched Stones. Hyperspace unraveled into a sky the color of old bone. And Zeffo rose beneath the mantis like a forgotten prayer carved into the flank of the galaxy. Canted cliffs and wind-scoured plateaus stretched away under a ceiling of hurried clouds. Rivers ran with the haste of the hunted, and in the distances, the ribs of ancient machinery poked from the hills like the fossils of titans. Grease set the ship down on a platform half swallowed by snow, grumbling about crosswinds and bad omens, while Seer stood at the ramp as if listening for an answer only the air could give. BD-1 chittered the instant the hatch opened, springing to Cal's shoulder with the ease of a bird finding home. The cold bit his cheeks, not cruelly, merely to remind him he still had a face to be stung. Zeffo, Seer said, drawing her coat tight. The people who lived here listened to the wind the way we listen to the Force. They carved its lessons into stone. Cordova believed their wisdom could guide us to the holocron's key. Cal looked out over the village below. Slate roofs bowed under frost. Windows shuttered against a weather that did not respect shutters. Imperial banners hung like bruises over doorways, their edges snapping. Patrols trudged in pairs, helmets bowed to the gale. The occupation sat heavy, like a wet cloak no one could take off. They came even here, he murmured, as if surprised that shadow could cross ice. They come everywhere, Seer said softly. The Empire is a tide that pretends to be a horizon. She touched his shoulder, a brief, careful contact. We go to the tomb of Aelram. BD knows the path Cordova walked. They descended switchbacks into the village, moving with the anonymity of travelers who had long practice at being unremarkable. BD-1 pointed, chirped, flashed a small map across the inside of Cal's visor. Cal nodded, stepping where the little droid suggested. The Force ran here with a peculiar clarity, thin and singing, like glass struck in a quiet room. Doors opened on shy faces. A child stared, then vanished into the folds of a shawl. Somewhere a radio played a melody meant to be cheerful and failing. Stormtroopers questioned a shopkeeper about shipments that had not arrived. At the square's far edge, a mural spanned a wall. Spiral glyphs and stylized eyes, lines that suggested wind turning stone, the way thought turns fate. Cal paused, fingertips grazing the paint. A wave rolled up through his palm into his ribs. Not a vision, not exactly. More a memory, etched in the world rather than in him. He saw robed figures, tracing the same lines with reverent hands. heard a phrase in a language he did not know but understood. Listen to what moves, through what endures. BD-1 chirped twice, urgent but not alarmed, and led them to a service tunnel that angled under the town. Breath fogged. Drips fell with the patience of stalactites learning to walk. They moved by BD's lamp and the blue glow of CAL's saber when corners asked for more light than courage could afford. The tunnel widened to a cavern where Zeffo architecture emerged from ice. Pillars shaped like braided wind, platforms cut to catch currents. The tomb of Aelram waited ahead, its door a circle within which a smaller circle rested, not quite centered, as if the whole world had been nudged by a playful god. Cordova wrote about their puzzles, Seer said, half to herself, half to the stone. The Zeffo spoke to the wind by giving it voices, pendulums, spheres, sails. Move the air, move the meaning. Cal laid his palm to the door. The circle vibrated, a cat hearing its name through a wall. He exhaled, stepping into the room beyond, and felt drafts thread his hair in curious fingers. Great spheres hung from chains thick as trees, carved with channels that guided the air into songs. BD-1 whistled, overjoyed. This was a playground for a mind that loved paths. What followed was not battle, yet it was struggle. And struggle is a teacher that does not raise its voice. Cal learned to listen for the wind's intent. He pushed a sphere and let the gale carry it farther than muscle could. He shut a vent and heard another open as if the tomb itself approved the correction. He timed his breath to the swing, moved when pauses presented themselves like the rests in a score. More than once he reached with the force not to shove but to cooperate, adjusting a hair's width rather than a span. The door at the chamber's far side sighed, and stone that had pretended to be eternal admitted that it could in fact move. Deeper in, echoes spoke of age. Frescoes showed tall figures with eyes closed against weather that passed through them. A lens array caught a suspicious shaft of light from a crack high above, bending it into a beam that warmed Cal's cheek. The warmth was not physical. It reminded him of afternoons in the temple archives when the sun found a window and decided to stay. At the heart, a dais, a pedestal, a plate of metal etched with swirls. Cal stepped upon it, and the room awakened with a sound like far thunder. Not threatening, ceremonial. Holographic script climbed the walls in slow spirals. BD-1 projected a ghost of Cordova, his kindly face creased with the joy of discovery. Aelram believed balance is not a state but a conversation, the recording said. The wind speaks, the mountain answers, the river insists, the stone accommodates. So must we. He smiled, eyes crinkling. If you find your way here, you are already learning to listen. Cal felt his chest loosen, a clasp undone. He had been forcing quiet upon himself for so long that collaboration tasted like fruit after iron. I hear you, he whispered, to the wind, to the stone, to a master he had not met. I'm trying. The dais unlocked a chamber below. They dropped by lift to a sanctum, where a Zeffo seal lay embedded in the floor like a sleeping eye. Cal knelt, pressed his palm to its cold surface, and a surge of awareness rolled up his arm. A star map, a sketched path from world to world. Bogano, Zeffo, Kashyyyk, Dathomir, Ilum. Each glowing faintly, each asking to be visited like an elder waiting to finish a story begun years before. BD-1 chirped, recording, storing, threading the points together with cheerful purpose. Cordova hid keys to the vault across the galaxy, Sayre said. A breath, relief braided with dread. We will have to chase them under the Empire's nose. Wouldn't be the first time they've missed something right in front of their masks. Grease's voice crackled through a comlink, trying to sound brave and edging toward nervous. Speaking of noses, stormtrooper noses are sniffing around the landing pad. Maybe find the exit key to that tomb. They retraced, faster now. Confidence turning corners into straight lines. Yet the tomb had one last lesson to offer. A gale that rose as they crossed a causeway, testing balance in a more blunt dialect. Cal leaned into it, feet wide, hand out, and reached with the force not to cancel the wind, but to take hold of its sleeve and ask for the courtesy of a pause. It obliged for a heartbeat. They passed. Behind them, the gust resumed, triumphant only in that it had not been offended. At the tunnel mouth, voices echoed, clipped, metallic, confident. A patrol had found the way down. Cal did not think. He moved. Blue hummed, blaster fire stitched light through ancient dust, and stormtroopers fell in white heaps that looked, disconcertingly, like abandoned shells. One tried to run. Seer shot his blaster hand once, cleanly, without gloating or anger. We do not have time for mercy that teaches the wrong lesson, she said, eyes dark, jaw tight. He nodded, not in complete agreement, but in understanding. Snow thickened to a falling curtain as they climbed toward the platform. The mantis squatted like a seabird in a squall, prim, indignant, ready to fly. Figures waited by the landing gear, purge troopers in matte black, and between them a shape Cal recognized with a hastened heart. Not the ninth brother. The air itself bent around this presence, as if trying to avoid its own discomfort. The second sister stepped forward, cape snapping, helm glossy with wet. "You flee to wind and stone for comfort," she said, voice amplified by the storm's theater. "They will not testify for you, Cal Kestis." "We came for answers," Cal returned, saber low at his side. "We found them." "Did you?" An almost friendly inquiry. "Then set them down and kneel. Let the Empire carry your questions for you." She ignited her blade, red reflected from the snow as if the storm had sprouted thorns. The fight was brief, a sketch rather than a portrait. She testing, he surviving. She pushed, he slid. She caught his guard and rotated it away with contemptuous neatness, then laughed softly as if praising a child for not falling as quickly as expected. Troopers pressed, forcing Cal backward toward the ramp. "Go," Sayre said, firing in disciplined bursts, taking no glory from accuracy. BD-1 shocked a trooper's knee, chirping with fierce indignation. Grease screamed something about meltwater in his vents. Cal disengaged in a shower of sparks and sprang to the ramp. The second sister did not pursue. Not quite. She stood in the snow and tilted her helmet, as if listening to a voice only she could hear. "Run to your next stone," she said. "I will learn its name before you do." The ramp closed. The mantis punched sky. Zeffo fell away. The village, the mural, the tomb whose wind song still trembled in Cal's bones. He stood in the corridor and let his breath slow. The river within did not roar now. It moved, and he moved with it. Seer joined him, leaning against the bulkhead as if gravity were heavier than it had been an hour earlier. "Kashyyyk," she said. "Cordova's trail points to Kashyyyk next." A ghost of a smile touched her mouth without reaching her eyes. "We will bring a little wind to a world strangled by chains." Cal nodded. Bead One settled against his neck with a sound that could only be called a purr if machines were allowed to purr. Outside, hyperspace stitched itself open, a seam he now felt ready to walk. He closed his eyes and saw carved spirals, and between them a path. "Listen to what moves through what endures," he whispered. The words did not need to be wise. They only needed to be true. And somewhere in the ship's bones, in the humming wires and the tired screws, something answered with a contented, almost Zeffo sigh. Chapter 7. Kashyyyk, the forest in chains. Kashyyyk rose from hyperspace like a single-held note made visible. Deep greens upon greens, canopies layered until sight gave up. Oceans braided with rivers that vanished under leaves. Thunderheads built palaces over the horizon, and then, with theatrical indifference, dissolved their walls into warm rain. The mantis descended through veils of vapor that smelled of sap and salt, and Grease, in spite of himself, spoke softly. "I could live here if it didn't try to eat me." What should have been serenity was marred by the Empire's geometry. Landing spines jabbed into the water like needles. Refineries breathed smoke into the afternoon. Pipes carried stolen lifeblood from the trees to feed machines that did not know how to sing. PD-1 trilled a low, worried chord. Cal laid a palm against the viewport, feeling, imagining, the slow pulse of the planet beneath the damage. Forests are patient, he told himself. But even patience can be strangled. They sat down on a makeshift pad amid mangroves, a place that smelled of oil and bark. The air was heavy enough to be carried in both hands. A skiff approached, hull pitted, paint proud. On its prow stood a man whose name had troubled empires both new and old. His beard was iron, his gaze brighter than the sky's edges, his stance the relaxed coil of a veteran who has lost the talent for surprise. Saw Gerrera lifted a palm in greeting as if he had no use for the formality of salutes. "You the Jedi?" Seer's chin rose a fraction. "He is." She gestured to Cal. "We seek a Zeffo artifact hidden in the shadow of your fight." Saw's smile tilted. "Ain't that all of us? Seeking something under the shadow of a fight." He studied Cal with the courteous skepticism of a man accustomed to being disappointed by promises. "You carry yourself like you know which end of that glow stick to hold. Good. I've got friends in cages and trees bleeding tar. Help me cut open a refinery, and I'll help you go hunting for ghosts." Cal looked past him to the smokestacks, then down at BD-1. The little droid whistled a brisk, approving motif. "We'll help," Cal said. The decision felt less like choosing and more like remembering. Jedi had worked in forests before. They would again. What followed was a choreography of small boats and large courage. Cal, Seer, and Saw's partisans threaded backwaters that smelled of leaf and iron, keeping low beneath the roots of giants. The Wookiees watched from the high places, eyes like dark wells. BD-1 projected schematics onto Cal's palm. Intake valves here, coolant lines there, pressure this and flow that. The refinery might pretend to be invulnerable, but everything that moves must also can be made to stop. They struck at dusk when birds screamed facts at one another, and the sky learned the word purple again. Partisans climbed as if the trees themselves had organized into a rebellion of ladders. Cal cut cables, redirected flows, and when patrols found them, blue met white in brief storms of light under leaves. Stormtroopers stumbled and fell into pools that did not want their weight. Alarms learned to sing for the wrong team. In the heart of the refinery, in a chamber where sap steamed in vats the size of houses, they found the cages. Wookiees clung to the bars with hands built to cradle, not to accept chains. Their voices rolled through the metal with a resonance that made Cal's bones answer. He sliced locks as if they were the roots of a weed. The first freed Wookiee, scarred, vast, eyes old and kind, pressed brow to Cal's in a gesture that felt like a benediction. BD-1 recorded the moment and chirped it back like a prayer. Saw appeared beside them, limping only because the body insists on telling truths the mind would prefer to edit. This will sting them, he said, meaning the Empire, meaning the arm that reached too far too often. It won't stop them. Nothing stops them. Not yet. A tremor ran through the floor as if the refinery shivered with a premonition. Sirens wheeled into furious agreement. Seer's comlink spat Grease's worried voice. We have incoming. Many incomings. Enough incoming that I'd like to be outgoing. They fought their way toward the exterior spine. Lightning forked across an anvil of cloud. On the gantries, Purge troopers waited, disciplined as iron filings in a field. Cal met the first with a parry that left his arm numb to the shoulder. The second fell to a cut that drew a shower of sparks from a railing. The third pressed too hard and discovered space where certainty had been. The force flowed through Cal in lean, quick lines now. Kashyyyk's rhythm, all tensile strength and sudden shifts. Above the thunder, another sound arrived. The keening of a fighter approaching too low, too fast. A black silhouette scythed through smoke and rain. Cal's heart misnamed it a TIE before memory corrected. Not a TIE. Her ship. The second sister's presence pressed against the air like a hand against a drum. Troopers straightened, as if night had informed them it would be watching. She appeared on a high gantry, a study in composure painted in red. You make noise wherever you go, she called conversationally, more to the forest than to the men in it. How generous of you to tell me your path. Saw spat over the rail. She yours? Not if I can help it, Cal said, and met the next rush. The fight narrowed to a set of choices that had the same shape no matter how one named them. Protect, advance, retreat, trust. Seer wove between platforms with a precision that suggested she remembered dances her body missed and her heart refused. She shot to disable, always, unless the seconds insisted on sterner grammar. Saw's people planted charges on braces that had not imagined ever being asked to hold loyalty. BD-1 jumped from Cal's shoulder to pull a lever, took a glancing bolt that singed a panel, and chirped indignantly across several octaves while still finishing the task. They reached the spine's highest platform as the charges ripened toward their argument. Below, released Wookiees surged through doors like water, remembering gravity. The forest answered them, branches leaning, vines loosening, roots shrugging aside their own constraints. Cal felt it as a tide lifting his soles. The second sister alighted like a raven upon the rim of the platform opposite, blade unlit, as if her confidence could do the burning instead. Rain hissed where it met her armor and died small deaths. "Surrender and your deaths will be instructive," she said. "Resist, and they will be wasteful." "Everything we do instructs someone," Sarah replied, voice mild. "Even you." The sister's helmet tilted. "You taught me that." The word fell like a pebble dropped into a well whose depth no one wanted to measure. Sarah's face did not move, but Cal felt the temperature shift as if the weather in her blood had changed. The sister ignited her blade. "Run, little Jedi. Run so I may keep up." The first detonation interrupted the duel that wanted to begin. The spine shuddered, a giant checking its balance. Saw whooped like a man hearing his own heart for the first time in years. "That's our cue," he shouted, and waved Cal toward a cable car that had been faithful to the Empire until this minute, and now reconsidered its relationships. "We ride or we fall." They rode. The car shrieked along its line above a valley of trees, roaring approval. Blaster fire reached for them and came up short. The second sister paced them on an aerial platform, cutting lines with dainty efficiency, then smiling beneath the helmet at the mathematics of gravity. Cal reached out, found a clamp the size of a bull, and held it closed with a hand and a vow, for 3 breaths longer than a hand should accomplish. The car slammed into the far platform, and they tumbled out, bruised but upright. In the clearing beyond, freed Wookiees gathered. Their chief, Tarful, broad as a door and gentler, enclosed Cal's forearms in a grip that said, "We remember favors in bark and bone." He spoke in rolling chords. Seer translated with only a few glances at a memory she kept wrapped and ready. "He will guide us to the Shadowlands, where Cordova walked. There is a ruin there, what you seek." Grease landed the mantis on a patch of river that pretended to be a runway. "Boarding! Boarding would be the action word," he cried, and BD-1 chirped agreement, while also filming a Wookiee cub climbing a trooper's helmet as if it were a new kind of tree. They took off under a canopy that closed behind them like a blessing. Lightning applauded. The refinery's spine collapsed in a long, kneeling bow. Saw saluted from his skiff, small and fierce against the immensity of green. "You know how to pick your friends, Jedi," he called on an open frequency. "Don't let the Empire teach you how to keep them." In the quiet after the storm, as the mantis climbed, Cal stood with a hand upon the bulkhead. He felt the ship's pulse, the echo of Kashyyyk's slower throb, the steadier rhythm of his own breath. "We did some good," he said, Not to ask for reassurance, but to locate himself in the map of meanings. We did, Seer answered. Then, because she owed herself the truth, not enough. Not yet. She looked past him into the long corridor of their road. Cordova's trail bends back to Zeffo, then to Dathomir. We will need what waits in both places. BD-1 nudged Cal's ear with the softest tap of metal. He smiled, despite the ache behind his ribs. All right, he told the little droid, the ship, the patient forest below. We keep moving. He closed his eyes and let the sound of rain on leaves follow them into the upward dark, like a memory that promised it would still be there when they returned. If they returned. When the chain of choices had finished invoking their names. And somewhere, not far enough, a woman who had once laughed in the same rooms as Seer removed her helmet in a place where mirrors were not permitted, and promised the ghost of her younger self that the next meeting would not be postponed by explosions or trees. Promises are knives. Some are used for carving bread. Others are kept for the artery. Chapter 8. Echoes of Dathomir. The galaxy spun dark and red as the mantis dropped into the skies above Dathomir. It was a world that seemed less a planet than a wound, its surface jagged, its air heavy with iron and memory. Lightning scrawled impatient graffiti across clouds the color of dried blood. Even Grease, who could complain his way through paradise, fell silent at the sight. I don't like this one, he muttered at last. Feels like the kind of place that chews ships for breakfast. Seer stood at the viewport, eyes unreadable. Dathomir is old with grief. The Night Sisters once ruled here, weaving the Force into flesh and spirit alike. Most are gone, but shadows cling. Cordova's notes point to a temple here, and to answers. BD-1 whined softly, reluctant yet dutiful, as Cal tightened the strap on his gloves. We won't linger, Cal promised the little droid. He promised himself too, though even as the words left his lips, he suspected the planet would have the last word. They landed in a clearing, ringed by spires of stone that looked like the fingers of a buried giant. Vines thick as ropes coiled among them. The soil was dark, damp, and oddly fragrant, as though every plant here had learned to bloom with poison as perfume. Cal stepped down, the saber at his hip suddenly feeling like a candle in a cavern. BD-1 scanned the ground, warbling anxiously at traces of ichor that pulsed faintly underfoot. The air carried a low, mournful hum, not mechanical, not natural, a resonance, ancient and patient. Cal paused, listening. The force here was heavy, not flowing like water, but clinging like tar. Each breath came with the weight of centuries pressing inward. He whispered, almost unconsciously, "This place remembers." Not far along the path, voices met them. Low, guttural, hostile. Shapes emerged from the mist. Zabrak warriors, faces painted, blades jagged. Their eyes burned with suspicion. One, taller than the rest, stepped forward. "You carry Jedi steel," he said, spitting the word. The Night Sisters say your kind brought ruin here. We seek knowledge, not conquest, Cal answered, keeping his voice even. A temple of the Zeffo. The warrior's lip curled. Knowledge is paid in blood. Leave or pay. They fought, because sometimes words are refused. Cal's blade carved blue arcs that lit the trees in brief starlight. The warriors pressed hard, their strikes furious but untempered. He deflected, yielded, redirected, never striking more than needed. BD-1 shocked an ankle and chirped like a furious sparrow. At last the warriors retreated into shadow, leaving only the hiss of rain as truce. The temple loomed ahead, a structure carved into a cliff, its doors as tall as pride, its face etched with Zeffo spirals, now scarred by Dathomir's vines. The air grew colder as they approached, though no wind stirred. Cal placed his palm upon the stone. Coldness seeped into him, not only of temperature but of memory. A vision unfolded. Cordova walking these same halls, recording notes, speaking softly to BD-1, who chirped with brighter tones then. The sense was of burden carried willingly, yet with the knowledge it would outlive the bearer. Inside, shadows nested thick. Statues lined the walls, their features worn, but their posture still commanding. They looked less like saints than sentinels, guarding secrets they might not wish to give. Cal stepped carefully, each footfall stirring whispers not entirely of sound. The force here was different, thicker, heavier, like smoke filling lungs instead of air. Even BD-1 grew quiet, his usual cheerful chirps dimmed into small, uncertain clicks. At the temple's heart, he found a dais upon which rested a shard of metal inscribed with Zeffo glyphs. As he touched it, the chamber brightened with a brief, illusory dawn. Voices filled the air, a conversation in Zeffo tongue, patient and grave, about balance and sacrifice. The shard was a key, not physical but conceptual, pointing toward another resting place of Cordova's map. BD-1 recorded, trilling proudly. But another voice intruded, sharp, feminine, bitter. From a balcony above, robed in fabrics black as charred silk, a figure descended. A night sister, her gaze cold with centuries. "You dare trespass," she hissed. "Your order murdered my sisters. Your war brought their graves." "I am not their killer," Cal said, lowering his blade. "I came for knowledge, to protect what little remains." Her laughter was like glass breaking. Protection. You are the Empire's shadow, whether you know it or not. Wherever Jedi walk, death follows. She raised her hands. Roots writhed from the ground, corpses stirred from the earth. The witch's magic, animating husks with puppet strings of hate. The battle that followed was unlike any Cal had fought. The risen husks moved with jerks and spasms, their eyes empty yet burning with borrowed will. He cut them down, but still they rose again, pulled to their feet by tendrils of green energy. It was not war, not combat. It was desecration, the twisting of peace into mockery. Each blow left him heavier, not lighter. BD-1 leapt from his shoulder, darted between shambling legs, and sparked them with a sharp pulse that broke the magic's hold for a breath. Cal used each pause to press forward, carving a path toward the temple's exit. The Night Sister's voice echoed through stone. "You cannot resist the soil's hunger. All who trespass here become roots." Cal shouted back, breath ragged. The Jedi do not belong to death. The words surprised even him. Less defiance, more reminder. At last, with a final sweep, the last husk fell motionless. Silence surged back, thick and absolute. Cal staggered into the clearing outside, lungs burning, rain washing black dust from his tunic. The temple's face loomed behind. Secrets half given, half withheld. Back aboard the Mantis, Cal collapsed against the bulkhead, sweat mingling with rain. Seer met his eyes, reading more than his words could convey. "You felt it," she said. "The hatred there, the pain." "I felt how close I came to answering it with my own," he whispered. Seer's gaze softened, though sorrow rimmed it. "That is Dathomir's trial. To walk away, carrying what you found, not what it pressed upon you." BD-1 clambered into Cal's lap, projecting the new glyph alongside the star map. More paths lit, more steps awaited. Yet the weight of Dathomir lingered like soil clinging to boots long after one leaves the field. That night, aboard the Mantis, as hyperspace cradled them in its cerulean tunnel, Cal lay awake. He replayed the Night Sister's words, not the venom, but the grief beneath it. He thought of temples and tombs, of stones carved to preserve memory, and how easily memory could sour into bitterness. "I came for knowledge, not conquest," he whispered again, a promise to the stars. BD-1 nestled closer, chirping a soft lullaby, as if to remind him, even in shadows, he was not alone. Cal closed his eyes, and though Dathomir's echo remained, so too did the warmth of loyalty perched upon his shoulder. Between the two, he drifted at last into uneasy but necessary rest. Chapter 9, Ilum, the Frozen Memory. The stars narrowed, and Ilum rose like a shard of pale glass adrift in darkness. Its surface gleamed with snowfields and frozen ridges, a world both austere and holy. Once, younglings had come here in procession to claim their Kyber, their breath fogging as they whispered lessons to one another in the shadow of tradition. Now, imperial excavators scarred the valleys, and star destroyers cast their long silhouettes across a planet that had once been sanctuary. The Mantis landed in a ravine shielded from patrols. Frost licked the air. Silence pressed against the ears until even one's heartbeat sounded impolite. Cal drew his cloak tighter. BD-1 shivered theatrically, projecting small heaters from his side panels, earning a brief smile from his companion. "This is where I should have come," Cal murmured. "Years ago, with the others." Seer's voice was quiet as snowfall. "The gathering was your right. The Purge denied you. But the Kyber still waits, and Cordova's trail runs through the temple." She studied him, her own face shadowed with memory. "This will not be easy." Ilum remembers. They crossed white plains where wind sang in long vowels. The temple rose from ice like a crystal frozen mid-growth, facets reflecting the cold light. Its doors were half buried, but still opened at the pressure of Cal's hand. Inside, silence deepened to reverence. The chamber walls glittered with embedded crystals, veins of frozen light, humming faintly with the Force. Cal felt it before he saw it. An echo of laughter, of small voices arguing gently over which crystal was theirs. A vision overtook him. He was small again, robe too long, excitement thrumming in his fingers. Jaro Tapal's presence hovered behind like a tower of patience. "Breathe, Cal," the memory said, not unkindly. "The crystal chooses you as much as you choose it." The vision fractured into shards of grief. The laughter ceased. The temple lay empty. His saber hung heavy at his side, cracked, broken from years of disuse. He fell to his knees upon ice, breath quickening. BD-1 whined and nuzzled his shoulder, pulling him back from the undertow. Cal exhaled, long, slow, grounding himself. "I'm here," he whispered. "I'm still here." He rose, following the pool deeper. The Force guided him like a current beneath frozen water. He found himself before a crystal embedded in ice, glowing faintly as though it remembered warmth. He pressed both palms to the ice. It did not yield. His saber hilt slipped from his grasp, clattering to the ground. He bowed his head, despair dripping from his ribs like meltwater. "I can't," he said aloud. "Not anymore." And yet, the current did not abandon him. It surged, carrying an image. Prouf's smile, Saw's laughter, Tarful's grip, Ceres' sorrowed patience, BD-1's unshakable loyalty. They were his chain now, not of constraint, but of belonging. He pressed again, not with strength, but with surrender. The ice cracked. The crystal slid free, small, luminous, perfect. Cal lifted it with trembling fingers. The crystal's glow deepened, reflecting in BD-1's lens eyes. The Force thrummed, tuning itself to his heartbeat. He inhaled, and for the first time since Bracca, exhaled without bitterness. "Thank you," he whispered, to the crystal, to the Force, to himself. He rebuilt the saber with care in the chamber, where ancient masters had once overseen dozens of children doing the same. Shards of metal, pieces scavenged from Bracca, a fragment of Jaro's old training blade, all came together under his hands, guided by the steady hum of the Kyber. The emitter flared. The blade sprang forth, green and alive. A song reborn. Cal smiled, weary but certain. "I am still Jedi." But Ilum was not yet finished. As he left the temple, snow shook loose from the cliffs. A shadow crossed the sky. T fighters, wings angled, engines screaming. The Empire had noticed. AT-ST walkers crunched through the ravine like predators made of metal and disdain. Cal ignited his new blade, the green fire cutting bright against white. "Time to test it," he muttered. What followed was struggle. Not of spirit, but of survival. Blaster fire scarred the snow. Walker shells turned ice to steam. Cal leapt from ledge to ledge, his blade carving defense and defiance. BD-1 chirped directions. Here a weak joint, there a frozen overhang to collapse. One walker sank under an avalanche of its own making. The other faltered when Cal drove his saber into its viewport, light against glass, then tumbled with a groan. Silence reclaimed the ravine. Fierce, almost proud. Seer called through the comlink, voice taut. "We've drawn too much attention." Back to the ship. As the mantis lifted, snow spiraled in its wake, and Ilum shrank beneath them. Cal watched until the temple vanished from sight, until only memory remained. He touched the hilt at his belt, green light sleeping inside. The blade was not just a weapon. It was a covenant renewed. The boy who had hidden on Bracca was gone. The Jedi who had built himself anew remained. And yet, beyond the comfort of triumph, he felt the echo of another presence. The second sister, waiting, watching, patient as frost. The hunt had not ended. It had only deepened. Chapter 10. The Fortress of Water and Night. The mantis fell from hyperspace into black. Not the tender velvet of deep space, but a glistening, oily dark that seemed to gather itself around a single thorn, thrust from an eternal sea. Below, the water stretched without shore, restless, metallic, reflecting no stars. And from its heaving skin rose a spear of architecture, a wound made into a tower. The fortress Inquisitorius. Lightning stitched pallid veins through the anviled cloud, and for a breath the bastions flashed into skeletal clarity. Gantries like ribs, antennae like needles, windows that did not invite, only observed. Even Grease, aficionado of grumbles and inventor of complaints, let his voice drop to a reverent whisper. "I do not like this kid. This place eats better pilots than me for breakfast, and I am gourmet." Cal stood by the forward viewport, the new green of his saber a sleeping promise at his belt. BD-1 perched upon his shoulder, head cocked, lens eyes widening and narrowing, as if the little companion tried to focus on dread itself. Seer joined them, her coat belted, her gaze fixed not upon the fortress, but upon an inward corridor where steps she had once taken still echoed. "I walked those halls," she said, her voice gentle and flat, like snow covering ruins. "Not as a prisoner, once. I walked them as a seeker. I trained someone there. Someone who fell and kept falling." "The second sister," Cal murmured, and the title felt inadequate for the grief inside it. A name tried to surface. Seer gave it form. "Trilla Suduri," she said. It was not a confession. It was a eulogy with the subject still breathing. "I hid her when the Purge began. I believed secrecy was safety. The Empire took her, and I ran. And what hunts us now is the shape of that failure." Cal's hand, calloused by labor and made steadier by trial, touched her sleeve. "Then we go together. And we bring her back if we can, or we let her go if we must." Seer inclined her head, the motion small, as if anything larger might break something fragile behind her eyes. "The holocron is here," she said. "Cordova's list. The children the Force has chosen. If the Inquisitors read it, they will drain the future dry. we end this. The mantis knifed down through weather that snarled. The sea rose as if to taste the hull. A landing spur uncurled from the fortress like a tongue of iron, accepting an offering it fully intended to devour. Grease whispered to the engines, to the wind, to luck, and set the ship down upon a platform glossed with rain. Doors waited ahead, a seam in black enamel, indifferent to please. Cal breathed once, and the saber latch answered his thumb with the old, soft promise of light returning. Inside, hush. Not the reverence of temples, but the hush of institutions that do not need to shout to be obeyed. Floors gleamed with a cleanliness that tried to exist without the concept of people. Red indicators pulsed at intervals like a mechanical heartbeat. Purge troopers came in files, weapons lifted with mathematical grace. Cal moved to meet them, not as a boy cornered, not as a scrapper defending a cot and a meal, but as a Jedi who had remembered the form of his own courage. Green opened against white. Bolts kissed a plane of light and flew elsewhere to do no harm. BD-1 rode his shoulder like a pennant of resolve, chirping calm suggestions into Cal's ear. Left hatch locked, right gantry clear. 2 more at the cross corridor. Mind the floor grid. Seer did not waste motion. Her blaster spoke in careful grammar. A noun, a verb, a period. She did not take pride in aim. She took responsibility. They moved like a phrase that had learned where to pause and where to linger. Doors sighed before Cal's reaching hand. Lifts came when called and shuddered, as if nursing secret fevers. Through a slit window he saw a chamber tiled like a mouth. Through another, long sinks where red rinsed from steel. Cells appeared along a descending spine. Compartments of silence with a body inside each, or the memory of one. Some prisoners stared without seeing. Some saw too much and turned away from their own sight. One rose, stepped to the translucent barrier, lifted an empty hand in an old salute that did not belong in this century. Cal's throat closed. His blade hummed. Not to fight, but to sing to those who remembered the melody. "We'll come back," he whispered, knowing the promise weighed more than the breath that carried it. "We will." They found the vault at the fortress's heart, where walls forgot ornament and became simple slabs of denial. Doors opened like eyelids surrendering to anesthesia. Within, on a pedestal the color of midnight's underside, hovered the holocron, small as a hand, large as a future, its facets pulsing with a rhythm that made Cal think of sleeping children breathing in unison. He took a step, another, the Force holding his shoulder as if to say, softly, steady. The temperature changed, not degrees, intention. A presence arrived from the shadow, the way a blade arrives at a throat, without announcement, without haste. The second sister, armor black and lacquered with discipline, cape lifting at the edges as if it had learned pride. Her saber bloomed in a wound-red circle. The color spilled along the walls with the moist sheen of living blood. "Did you think," she asked, voice velvet drawn over razors, "that the Empire would leave its prize unattended?" Cal's saber blossomed in green that was not naive. It was renewal, "I thought," he said, "that you might want to listen before you lose the chance." They drew near, and talk became technique with a politeness that felt cruel. Her cuts were paragraphs, thesis, support, conclusion, each intended to corner him into a single permitted answer. Yield. Cal gave ground when the question required it, returned pressure when meaning allowed. Sparks wrote brief constellations and vanished. Their footfalls left wet signatures on black floors that were already forgetting. Above, through slats, Seer watched. The teacher who knew she had forfeited the right to instruct, yet could not stop seeing every error and every bravery. "You cannot save them," Trilla's mask said, reflecting Cal's face back to him in a warped mirror. Not the names in that crystal, not the order that insisted on dying politely. Not me. "I can refuse to stop trying," Cal said, and he pressed. Not to win, but to hold space for the possibility of another end than the one the fortress wrote for everyone who entered. He caught her blade on a bind that should have been impossible after Zeffo's wind lessons, slid, twisted, and nipped a line along her gauntlet. She did not cry out. She tilted her helm as if tasting a spice she could not place. They carried the argument up a helical stair that smelled of desalinated air and disinfectant. Doors opened in panic and shut out of shame. On a gantry that overhung a cathedral of storm, rain came sideways, decorating their dance with silver threads. BD-1 scampered along a rail and projected a flicker of schematics that told Cal where the gantry would fail if he stepped too near the corroded seam. He did not step there. He remained where the argument remained honorable. Then the line broke. Trilla glanced up, not toward Cal, but toward Seer, toward the woman who had governed the map of her childhood. The mask turned. "Master," she whispered, not loudly and not long. The syllables slid down the helm like tears that did not know how to be water. In that human instant, the artifice of inevitability cracked. Cal slipped his blade under hers, levered, and sent the red weapon spinning away to lodge, hissing in the rain-slick mesh. Trilla fell to one knee before the holocron, hands empty, breath harsh. Shoulders small under armor that had been built to look like absolutes. Seer descended. It was not triumph. It was pilgrimage. She stepped as if each rung were a confession. She stopped an arm's length away and let her face be seen. No visor, no mask. Only a woman whose choices had grown teeth. "Trilla," she said, and the name shook. "I am sorry. I left you in the dark and taught the darkness how to say your name." Inside the mask, a hinge of silence. Then a voice, smaller than the helmet's geometry allowed. "Then do it. Give me rest. Don't make me learn hope again." Cal lowered his blade. "We don't end people," he said. "We end cycles." His hand extended, not for the holocron, for Trilla herself. A palm offered like a small, stubborn boat on a violent sea. For a breath, she swayed toward it, toward something that would have been called grace in a kinder century. The sea below convulsed. The air thickened with a dread so physical that the gantry's bolts seemed to groan. A sound rose, a respirator's metronome, the clock by which terror keeps time. Lightning did not reveal the new figure. It flinched from him. The water climbed the tower to see and fell back learnedly afraid. The fortress, which had not respected anyone, adjusted its posture. From the storm's mouth, Darth Vader walked. His presence arrived first. A void that was not absence, but appetite. Then the black, then the red. His saber ignited not as a challenge, but as a signature scrawled on the storm's face. Trilla's helm turned. Master. Not to him, to Seer, to someone she had been, to a man she had never met. Vader's voice poured like cooled metal shaken from a mold. You were weak. The blade fell in a single sentence with no punctuation and ended the grammar of her days. Run, Seer breathed, not a command, a sacrament. Cal's body obeyed his teacher, his master, his memories. And the oldest lesson Jaro Tapal had hammered into the bone: live so that purpose may continue. They fled through arteries of steel as the fortress began to drown in its own sea. Alarms pretended to be louder than Vader's breath and failed. Cal carved doors that dared be closed. Bridges trembled, then decided they preferred to be debris. BD-1 squealed directions, his tiny body a buzzing compass against Cal's neck. Behind them, not footsteps, inevitability. The hangar yawned like a lung collapsing. The mantis hovered, battered by wind. Grease shouted a prayer disguised as profanity. Cal leapt. Fingers found ramp. Seer staggered and leapt after. The ship rose. And Darth Vader stood at the edge of the platform, as if cliffs had evolved to give him convenient stages. His saber lifted, not to throw, but to promise. Hyperspace swallowed them like a mercy. The fortress disappeared. But the rhythm of that breath remained, like a stain beneath clean water. Cal lay on cold decking, green extinguished, chest burning, and understood that victories could be escapes, and still count as vows kept. The holocron pulsed on a table, tiny star, heavy as a world. Seer touched its light with 2 fingers, as if blessing a child. We are not finished, she said, but we are not ashes either. Not ashes, Cal agreed, and let the ship carry them toward a dawn he could not yet see. Chapter 11, The Shadow of Vader. The sea struck the fortress like a drum, and the fortress answered with thunder stitched by lightning. And over all of it, there rose a slower rhythm, a machine breath that had forgotten to be human. Cal felt it before he saw him, the way a room learns that night has entered. The air pressed inward, the light lost height, and from the vapor that climbed the tower came a figure that made architecture seem apologetic for trying to be tall. Darth Vader walked from the storm, and the storm asked permission to continue. Trilla, the second sister, pivoted, crimson blade recovered, shoulders square with a bravery that had been trained to kneel. The red drew a wound through rain. For a heartbeat, the three of them stood within a triangle of fate. The hunter, the hunted, and the one who had taught them both what it meant to be abandoned by a world that had promised order. Vader's saber ignited with the ease of inevitability. He did not raise his weapon in challenge. He allowed it to exist, and existence was challenge enough. "Inquisitor," he said, and the vocoder gave the word the geometry of a verdict. "You have failed." Trilla's blade faltered. The helm turned towards Seer, as if a compass trying to remember north. "Master," she said, and in the syllable there were 7 people. The girl she had been, the captive, the student who had learned to hate so she would not drown, the officer who had mastered contempt, the woman who had hesitated, the warrior who would die, and the child who had not yet been betrayed. "Please." "Mercy," Vader observed, and the black lenses accepted no reflection. "A weakness taught by the dead." The stroke came precise as a theorem. Red crossed red. Armor gasped. Trilla returned to the quiet she had not been offered in life. The rain did not wash it clean. It only made it shine. Seer's cry tore free. Not the sound of a general losing a soldier, but the sound of a mother learning, too late, the price of survival. She lifted both hands, as if to pull the body back by the air itself. "Trilla!" "Run," she said, a moment later. And the word was a bridge Cal did not argue with. He moved, BD-1 clamped tight, the Force arranging the next step and the next, as if the floor decided, one tile at a time, that life still had errands for him. Vader advanced without haste. Haste is for those who fear time. Cal struck, because the body that flees without defiance loses more than distance. Green met red, and where they touched, the air screamed a thin, bright line. Vader's answer was not anger, it was physics. Cal's blade jolted from the bind as if repelled by magnetism older than matter. His heels slid. His ribs stung. The Sith Lord shifted one wrist, only that, and the world bent around its pivot. Seer fired, aiming at joints, not because she believed blaster fire could kill him, but because she believed discipline could buy seconds. Vader's hand rose. Blue bolts died like rain against a furnace. He flicked his fingers. Seer flew, struck steel, fell to a knee, rose again because shame does not like to be seen lying down. "You dare return," he said, as if returning were impolite. "You, who left what was yours to guard." Cal felt the old gravity of helplessness try to pour sand into his joints. He refused it. He stepped, cut, fainted, the way Zeffo's wind had taught him, to partner with inevitability instead of imagining victory against it. Vader allowed the movements to occur, and then closed his fist in the air. Cal's throat obeyed. Spots of white throbbed at the edges of his vision. He heard BD-1 as if through water. A worried arpeggio. Brave. Absurd. "Not yet," Cal rasped, and pushed back with a hand that remembered Ilum's crystal choosing him when he had chosen surrender. The grip loosened. Not in concession, but as a cat releases a mouse in order to enjoy the second pounce. The Jedi are dead, Vader informed the storm, which already knew. You are their echo. I silence echoes. Seer rose entire, drew the force around her like a cloak woven from every failure she refused to let be final, and hurled the room at him. Consoles tore free. The pedestal that had held the holocron became a stone thrown by an age against its murderer. Vader cut, caught, cast aside, advanced. But the seconds existed. Cal seized them, turned them into strides, turned strides into a corridor. BD-1's little claws dug a loving pain into his tunic as the droid clung and guided with frantic, brilliant certainty. Doors closed. Vader opened them by believing otherwise. Bridges shuddered. Cal leapt the moment before collapse, and the drop behind him admitted that respect could be practical. Water punched through seams with the force of a planet disappointed in engineering. Sirens promised help to anyone who had built them, and delivered none to anyone who had not. They reached a lift that had forgotten its purpose. Cal carved the panel, crossed wires with the intuition of a man who had learned machinery by living among its bones. And the cage rose with a groan that sounded like prayer spoken in rust. Vader appeared below as the doors slit shut, merely a figure framed by ruin. And yet it was like sealing a viewport against a star. Light still existed on the other side. It simply did not care for your opinions about survival. The hangar was a cathedral of failing geometry. Girders hung like questions no one could answer. The mantis hovered at a painful angle, her belly open, her ramp a tongue pleading, jump, jump now. Grease stood framed in haze and spray, 4 hands doing the work of 7, eyes wide with a faith he had not admitted to owning. "Kid," he bellowed, voice taller than he was, "this is the worst vacation I've ever taken you on." Seer stumbled beside Cal, breath ragged, blood bright at her temple. And still she reached to steady him, as if the instinct to protect had survived every lesson contrary. BD-1 loosed a terse whistle that meant the following. The ramp'll be there for 2 breaths, and then not at all. Cal ran. He did not count. He did not look back. When the deck dropped away, he jumped, because falling and flying are twin words, separated only by the presence of a friend. His fingers found the ramp's edge. BD-1 landed against his collarbone with a pained chirrup. Grease's grip was suddenly everywhere, at a wrist, at a forearm, at the truth that crews become families when terror hands them a pen. Seer leapt, struck, slid, and Cal caught her with a gasp that felt like expelling the ocean he had never swallowed. Behind them, the doors tore from their rails and skittered like leaves before a storm, and Vader stood in the opening, large enough to make the hangar look like a box built for a child's toy. The ramp jerked upward. The mantis surged. Vader's outstretched hand closed on empty air. And yet Cal felt the ship resist, as if a mountain had set its palm against the hull. Grease screamed something that meant more power than we have, and the engines, flattered, provided it. They climbed. The fortress shrank into a dark thorn driven into a cold world. Lightning tried to follow and lost interest. In the common room, when the compartment doors sealed and the ship remembered how to breathe, Cal lay staring at the ceiling as if it might develop stars. Seer knelt beside him, one hand hovering over his chest, unsure whether to bless or to apologize. "We have the holocron," she said at last, voice made of shredded silk. "But it cost too much." Cal turned his head to the small weight on his shoulder. BD-1, dented and proud, peeped a question whose answer he already knew. "I'm here," Cal whispered. "We're here." He closed his eyes and saw Trilla's last look, not of hatred, but of recognition. He saw Vader's blade erasing the chance of a different end. He saw his own hands, too young and too old, holding a future that wanted him to choose who counted as a child. Hyperspace gathered them, blue on blue. A lullaby that remembers wars and sings anyway. Cere sat with the holocron and did not touch it. As if to lay hands upon it would be to write names into a ledger that had already cost one. Grease made stew because hands that cook can sometimes trick a heart into believing life continues. BD-1 hummed a scale and then another, until Cal nodded to the rhythm. The shadow of Vader did not lift. It would not. Shadows do not vanish because a door was shut. But there are lights that do not ask permission of shadows. Cal felt one of those lights, small, green, precise, sleeping within the hilt at his belt. He exhaled, slow, and promised the breath that followed it would not be wasted. Chapter 12, The Quiet Dawn. Hyperspace carried the mantis like a mother carries a sleeping child, careful of bruises no one can see. The cerulean tunnel blurred along the canopy, leaving sighs of light on bulkheads and bowls, and the silence between companions. Cal sat cross-legged on the common room floor, not meditating as a temple instructor would have defined the word, but listening as the wind of space stroked the hull with patient hands. Before him, resting on a cloth Grease had insisted was appropriate for anything fragile and rumor-haunted, lay the holocron, a jewel shaped like a decision. BD-1 perched near, small feet magnetized to the table's edge, his lens eyes lowered in a posture that looked for all the world like reverence. Cere sat opposite Cal, back straight despite the fatigue that turned posture into labor. She did not look at the holocron. She looked at her hands, hands that had failed and rescued and failed again. Hands that still wanted to teach and could not trust themselves to try. The ship hummed a chord that could have been called safe, if anyone on board were willing to use the word. Trilla, Cal began, and the name floated between them, as if testing the cabin's air for forgiveness. She hesitated. Cere closed her eyes. When she spoke, the words were a cloth wrung of water. She did. She reached. And I saw the girl whose braids I tied too tightly. And then he came. And the reaching ended. Her jaw hardened, not in anger, but against a cry she did not have time to release. I left her once. I will not leave what she asked of us. What did she ask? Cal whispered. To make her end mean a beginning for someone else, Cere said. She lifted her gaze at last to the holocron, and the small glow it gave painted two bright tears in her eyes. This has the names of children. Seeds Grease entered without his usual huff of theatricality. He carried mugs that steamed shyly, and he set them down one by one, a ritual without temple or liturgy. I won't tell you what to do, he said, which in Grease was the purest form of love, except to say, whatever you pick, you won't do it alone. He placed a hand on Cal's shoulder, brief and warm, then on Seer's, firmer, as if returning some weight she had given up out of habit. He left them and busied himself at the galley, clatter, stir, mutter, a symphony of domestic noises that had no business sounding like hope, and did anyway. Cal brushed the holocron with 2 fingers. It unfurled obediently, a flower that remembered starlight. Faces arose in miniature above the table. Children laughing in back alleys, under suns with names he did not know. Faces peering over stall counters, silhouettes sleeping in hammocks on worlds of warm rain. Cordova's voice accompanied them, gentle, assured. Potential is not a promise. It is an invitation. Extend your hand. Cal's throat tightened. He saw Prav calling him kid with a grin that had held the planet Bracca together for him when nothing else would. He saw Tarful's brow pressed to his. He saw Saw Gerrera's tired smile under thunder. He saw Triller looking towards Seal and forgetting, for a heartbeat, to hate. The weight of the holocron was not in his palms. It sat in his ribs, heavy and sacred. What if training them paints targets on their backs? He asked. What if hiding them starves the galaxy of what it needs? Seer did not rush an answer. When the Order was at its strongest, she said at last, we mistook numbers for wisdom, process for compassion. Perhaps the next light rises not by decree, but by consent. Perhaps the Force prefers to choose its moments unobserved. She exhaled, slow. We can choose to be a shield without choosing to be a factory. BD-1 chimed, a low, thoughtful note. He projected a single face, larger than the others. A girl missing a front tooth, holding a carved stick like a blade, looking at her reflection in a junkyard mirror. The image lingered, faded. Cal rubbed his thumb across the holocron's edge. The device hummed, not impatiently, simply alive. Then we free them, Cal said, the decision leaving him like a breath he had been holding since Bracca. We free them from us as well as from the Empire. He lifted the holocron. Its facets warmed his palms as if the names inside had blood. Seer nodded. Once. A teacher agreeing with a student not because he had answered the question on the tablet, but because he had found the question that mattered. Do it, she whispered. Let them stay children, for as long as the galaxy allows. Cal closed his eyes. The Force did not roar. It gathered like rain before falling, gentle, inevitable. He pressed, and the holocron resisted, as all beautiful things resist their end. BD-1 leaned in, tiny metal forehead touching Cal's wrist for one heartbeat. A blessing given by a friend who did not know the word for priest. The facets cracked. Light leaked like bees. Then the lattice surrendered, and the names became sparks that rose, circled, winked into the air, until only the memory of their warmth remained. Silence. And then Grease exhaled a breath he had been holding for an impolite amount of time. Well, he said softly, I guess dinner's on me. They ate at the small table, bowls steaming, spoons clinking, the ship murmuring approval. Ser smiled once quickly at a joke Grease made about stewing sea monsters, and the smile was so unexpected that BD-1 recorded it automatically, filing it next to starscapes and battle plans and small, brave acts. Cal felt tired in a way that had nothing to do with running, a keeling over of the spirit after trying to carry a building out of a fire. Yet beneath the fatigue lay something quieter than triumph and more durable than joy. It was the knowledge that he had not confused power with permission. Later, when the bowl stood rinsed and inverted, and Grease had faked a yawn so obvious it counted as courtesy, Cal and Seer returned to the viewport. Hyperspace tapered. Stars stepped from behind their curtain with the modesty of old friends. A nebula breathed lilac in the distance. Somewhere the Empire rearranged its maps to reflect a fortress damaged and a prize lost. Somewhere Vader stood on a deck that pretended to be a shore and listened to the ocean of space reach for him and retreat. Reach and retreat. And the rhythm did not comfort him the way it comforts the living. What now? Cal asked. Not because he required a plan, but because asking was how he honored the dead. By refusing to stop walking. We follow Cordova's other paths, Ser said. We help where we can, without believing we alone can help. We find the ones who are already fighting, and remind them they are not alone. We teach, carefully. We listen, constantly. And when the day comes that the galaxy calls for more than 4 people on a ship, we answer with more than 4. BD-1 hopped to the rail and whistled at a passing comet, as if greeting a neighbor. Cal leaned his forehead against the cool transparisteel. He thought of Jaro Tapal, of a hand the size of an oar resting on his shoulder. Survive, the memory said. He answered not aloud, I will. But I will do more than that. He unclipped his saber, ignited it once, a slender column of green that painted his features calm. He moved through a simple form, slow as dusk. A cut like a bow, a guard like an embrace, a flourish not for display but for gratitude. When he closed it down, the afterimage hung in his vision like a fern's shadow on stone. I am still Jedi, he said, and this time the words did not argue with doubt. They simply took up residence where breath lives. Sleep came in its own hour. Grease snored a rolling thunder. BD-1 nested in a socket, lights pulsing in a lullaby pattern he used only when everyone had made it back to the ship. Seer sat a while longer, alone with a map that no longer contained names, and laid her palm flat on the table as if to feel the echo of sparks cooling. She whispered something that might have been, forgive me, and might have been, thank you. Perhaps, in the secret grammar of loss, it was both. When Cal finally lay down, the mantis cradled him, and the great engines sang the humble music of survival. Outside, a thin, pale wash of dawn climbed the edge of a nameless world they passed without waking. It was not triumph, not the trumpets of parades or the roar of banners. It was the soft light by which workers rise, by which children squint at breakfast, by which fugitives slip from shadow to shadow, while deciding what kind of people they will be. In that light, at last, Cal Kestis let the tension drop from his hands and breathed the long breath between wars. Rest, He told himself, the way a master might tell a Padawan to eat. We begin again, tomorrow. And somewhere within the ship's old bones, a pleasant creak answered. As if the mantis herself, stubborn and loyal, had nodded in agreement.